Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be discussing today is how No Child Left Behind began to mandate the levels of parental involvement in the schools, particularly saying that different procedures as far as parental involvement in the classroom needed to be guaranteed in every school district. I thought that this was really interesting. I thought that most schools would want the parents to be involved, but I guess this obviously wasn't the case if something had to be put into place to mandate it. Um, One thing I said that teachers need to be weary of and like culturally aware of is the understanding of the changing demographics of families. Um, Grandparents as parents, like acting in the place of mother and father, single mother houses, single father houses, they have to be teachers have to be aware that those exist because many teachers think of a regular family unit, but that's not always the case. And you need to learn that sometimes you need to work in different ways with these families. It also began to go on to discuss the parent-teacher compact, stating that parents are to expect a high level of education through the curriculum and instruction, but then the parents have a role in that too that is just important as the school's role. They need to volunteer in the classroom, they need to monitor their kids' TV, they need to check the homework, they need to be on top of their attendance. So it's not just the school, it's just as much the parents' role, so that's why there's a little bit of a compact there. Um, then it began to discuss family-centered programs, which includes family-centered teaching, which is instruction that focuses on the needs of the students through the family unit and is designed to help both generations. I think that this is interesting, that the schooling that they're going to try to provide is supposed to be able to benefit the parents and the children. I think that's a great idea, personally. Um, it includes helping parents learn in hopes of being able to decrease the illiteracy cycle. I mean that's what the goal of school is. So I mean that's great. It also tells you how you can help your child as a parent as far as the compact goes. I'm just going to focus on the math applications of that. You can teach your child the real-life applications of math. You can look for activities that involve math, such as cooking, building scale models, planning trips, using money. All of that, the parents can incorporate math into daily life activities with their kids, teaching them. Um, intergenerational programs was another thing that was discussed, and then this goes kind of back to the parents being grandparents. It kind of puts together two or more generations and brings them together in one, allowing the older generation to help teach the younger generation. I think that's really interesting, especially the text discussed how a group of kids went to a nursing home. That's great because the kids benefit and the seniors in the citizen home benefit because I mean they don't want to be there all the time. And there's 6 types of community involvement that teachers can engage in, which is they can be aware of the parents. They can have the parents in the room. They can have them volunteering. They can have, which is another one, volunteering. They can have communication. That's another vital one for community involvement. Learning at the home, making sure that learning doesn't stop in the classroom. It goes outside. That's important. Advocacy and decision making, which can be done through the PTA, and then collaboration with the community. You need to know what's out there when you're a teacher. You don't want to just be in the bubble of the school. You want to be able to utilize what's in the community as well. That is so, so important. I know my school, they incorporated the community in so many different ways, like all the way back to 4th grade, whether it was as simple as going to a Chinese restaurant, when we read a book about Chinese food and how to make dumplings. Like, I mean, simple things like that. That shows community involvement. Then it begins to discuss parent-teacher conferences. Obviously, everybody should know what a parent-teacher conference is. Steps 6 and 7, they outlined a bunch of different steps, were the most interesting ones to me. Okay, step 7 in this whole parent-teacher conference was to learn to listen. I think that this is really important because I feel like all too many times people walk into those parent-teacher conferences thinking that it's all about the teacher telling the parent about their kid, when I think vice versa is just as important. Step 8 was follow-up. I feel like all too many times the communication between parents and teachers ends right after the parent-teacher conference, which should not be the case. There should be a constant communication back and forth and back and forth. It shouldn't just be one meeting a year. Personally, I think school districts should incorporate more than one parent-teacher conference day a year. The next thing that the text discussed was home visits. That proved to obviously be very controversial during our class discussion. For me and where I stand on that, I personally think it does have a place. When other resorts have failed and when a student is struggling, I think that home visits may potentially provoke more out of a student. And I think that it is a viable resource to be used in case of a need for it. So you definitely do not want to rule that out. As far as parent-teacher conferences and these home visits, you need to be sensitive to single-family, single-parent homes. You need the language barrier that will be encountered in some homes, which also incorporates the idea of teachers need to be culturally competent. Teachers do need to be culturally competent, which this is just kind of a random thing, a side note. I think at Seton Hall, I do not mean to critique the program at all, but as far as cultural competence, I think if we were required as education majors to take a language, it wouldn't hurt to have at least one semester of a language. You want to be able to communicate with other people of different cultures and languages, so I think that as teachers it's important to know the bare minimums to at least one other language. So, I mean, not to critique the Seton Hall education program whatsoever, because it's great. Another thing discussed was parent empowerment, providing parents with decision-making and participation opportunities. You obviously want to have a strong group of parents behind you in a school, because sometimes they fight for what kids really need when the administration or the teachers don't see it, so that's obviously a great thing. School choice vouchers in charter schools. Another very touchy subject. Some people disagree with it, some people don't disagree with it. To each their own. In my part, I personally think that should the school district have to pay when a parent wants their child to go to another school for no obvious reason, or there's nothing actually wrong with the public school that they're in? I think that may be a little wrong when you make the public school pay for that. And it also brings up the whole idea of religion. If they decide to go to a religious school and the public school's paying for it, it's very controversial. It's not going to go away, so we just have to kind of accept it and learn how to cope with it. Now we move on to more of the laws in education. The First Amendment talks about freedom of speech. You're guaranteed a right to freedom of speech. But sometimes that may be diminished in a classroom, because you don't want students to say something too crazy, and teachers, sometimes you really need to watch your mouth around students sometimes, because you don't want to offend anybody or go against any beliefs, which is really important. The Fourth Amendment is a basic right to privacy, which brings up the whole sports testing, urine testing. I know in my high school, all athletes were required to do it if the team advanced to the state champions or any sectionals. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's not an invasion of privacy, and I think it's good to have a grasp on that. The 14th Amendment, due process and the guarantee of life, liberty, and property. Once again, it's guaranteed through education, which is a good thing. All of these are guaranteed, but somehow may be hindered a tiny little bit and can be a little controversial, because some people may argue that they're denied the right in the educational world. I don't think they are. I think everything that happens in the classroom happens for a reason, and anything that's restricted, there's a very, very clear reason why it would be restricted. Because you have to maintain some order and some political correctness, and you don't want to be accused of trying to sway a student to believe something that they don't believe, that they need to develop their own beliefs in. So I think it's important. Civil Rights Act of 1964, sorry, had a great impact. Education Amendment, Title 4 of 1972, and the Education for All Handicapped Children, which led to IDEA. All things that had great impacts, made everything more equal for all students. What I found interesting was state laws, not a national law, govern attendance, content, curriculum, core requirements, school searches, like the whole search and seizure thing, and drug testing. I didn't know that it was state-run. I think it would make more sense to have a national guideline for that, but I mean, if states can regulate it properly, then that's great. Next thing, school desegregation. Great thing that happened, obviously. One thing that shocked me as part of this, I did not know involuntary busing existed. I guess I'm naive, if you want to say that, but I thought that once the civil rights movement ended, and it kind of everything was succeeded, there wasn't issues with people being told where to go. But obviously that was not the case. I'm clearly wrong with that. Having to bus people to certain districts that are so far away to reach a certain amount of number, I think that's wrong. And I thought it was really interesting. I had no clue that anything like that existed. But I think it's great, and that the desegregation ended because it ultimately led to greater achievement for the African American students and led them to more equality in the education system, which, that's the way to go. Equality in education. Okay. Now I'm going to start talking about teachers. Teachers need to make sure they're not negligent. They don't engage in intentional torts, and they adhere to strict liability. They, as far as negligence, they can't fail to take reasonable precautions and cares in the classroom. They need to care for their students. They are in place of parents when the kids are in school. That's really important for all teachers to remember. You can't assault a student. You can't hit them. You can't do anything. No sexual harassment, none of that. Like, that doesn't fly, and I think it's disgusting when a teacher does take advantage of a student like that, and it's completely wrong. And then the strict liability, not keeping dangerous or hazardous materials away from a student. Once again, teachers should know better and keep that stuff away from the students. Okay, next thing. Tenure. Okay, in my life, some of the teachers I had that had tenure completely deserved it. There's a couple out there who, when they get into their 20-plus years, they get very lazy and shouldn't be taught anymore. I think tenure needs to be revamped a little bit, in my opinion, because there are some very lazy teachers. I don't want it to go away anywhere, because obviously for teachers who would work hard, like I think I would obviously work hard, it should be an incentive. But some teachers use it to become lazy, which is wrong. It's also great that teachers have academic freedom to teach what they want and how they want. Obviously, you have to do it in a reasonable boundary. So teachers have some great rights also, in addition to the freedom they can collectively bargain. They're basically a union, which is great. If there's contract issues, you have that collective bargaining option, which my school engaged in, or I think they engaged in it. Obviously they were union, and they did not have a contract, and obviously striking is part of that. I remember my freshman year, every Friday morning they would go outside, picket with their orange shirts on, so all the parents would see them, and it was interesting. They refused to give extra help on Friday mornings, which, I mean, it was one morning a week. They got their point across, I guess. They tried to not schedule tests, so it didn't really impact the students too much, this form of striking. Okay, now, obviously, they're also guaranteed equality by gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy leave, they're guaranteed, so they're guaranteed all that great stuff. Now I'm going to move on to discussing students and parents' rights, and then I'm done. I've talked enough. Students have the right to speech, freedom of speech, and also dressing the way they want it. Those are the two things that become controversial. Students want to be able to say what they want, but when it becomes disruptive to the whole school, or it's harmful to other people, they get in trouble, which I think it's completely within reason. Some students may argue that it's not, and it's a violation of the First Amendment. One thing I did find interesting was the story about the student who held a sign across the street from his school protesting something, and he was suspended for it. I thought because it wasn't on school grounds, it would be fine, but not. Like, he was still suspended for it. Which, I mean, I think it's great that, or not great, it's It's great that the school's monitoring what's being said, but is that taking it too far when he's off school grounds and you suspend him for something that happens? I don't know, that's debatable. That's completely debatable. Dress codes is another thing that's becoming more and more popular. Does it take away freedom of expression? Who knows? And as I discussed earlier, the whole urine testing, is that an invasion of privacy? Very controversial topics. Honestly, I think if they're not being done in malicious ways, it's fine. I remember one time in middle school, somebody stole something, and the principal went locker to locker to locker to locker looking for the phone that was stolen. I think it was a phone. Or was it a laptop? It might have been a laptop. But, I mean, either way, when there's reason for it, I don't think there's any issue with it. And when students do misbehave, expulsion and suspension are obviously options. All students, as long as it's in the handbook, know that. They know that going in. So, they have to remember that. Now, parents' rights. The main one I want to discuss is homeschooling. Obviously, it's becoming more and more popular. It's obviously a parent's choice to homeschool their child. I think it's interesting that it's becoming more and more of a popular trend because parents aren't necessarily always teachers, but I mean, obviously there's always a reason for it, and if they think that their child will be better suited at home, by all means, if that's what your child needs, I guess that's what they need. Okay, I want to sum this up real quick with a couple last words. Communication, collaboration, and knowing your role. Everybody needs to know what their role is, what's expected of them, and to act on that. That's the parents, teachers, community, and the students. If everybody can collaborate, communicate effectively, then you're going to have an effective school. Okay, this is Chapter 6 and 8 blog. I'll see you next time for 4 and 5, which is our last one.